The horse came in slow, the way dying things move, not with drama, not with announcement, but with the quiet surrender of something that has been walking too long without rest. The man in the saddle sat with his shoulders curved forward, his chin nearly touching his chest, his wide-brimmed hat pulled so low over his face that the few souls still awake in Caldwell Creek could not have told you in that amber dusk whether he was alive or simply propped up by habit and gravity. Dust coated every inch of him, his hat, his coat, his boots, the flanks of the horse beneath him, as though the desert itself had tried to swallow him and settled for claiming him as its own. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody called out a greeting. In Caldwell Creek, strangers were either ghosts passing through or trouble arriving late. And the people of that town had learned long ago it cost nothing to wait and see which one this was. Sheriff Miles Harlan was sitting in his usual chair on the porch of his office when the rider came down the main street. He was a broad man in his mid-50s, built like the trunk of an oak that had weathered too many storms. Thick through the chest and shoulders, with hands that looked carved from cedar and left to season in the sun. His hair was iron gray, cut close on the sides. His face was square and set in the permanent expression of a man who had seen too many things go wrong to be surprised when they did. He wore a brown vest over a white cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a dented tin badge pinned over his heart, and a gun belt that sat low on his right hip with the practiced ease of something worn so long it had become part of his body. His boots were dusty, his eyes were not. Those gray eyes tracked the rider the way a hawk tracks a field mouse, not with urgency, not with excitement, but with the calm, total attention of a predator who has all the time in the world. He watched the horse pick its way along the rutted dirt of the main street. He watched the rider's posture, the fall of his coat, the particular way his left hand rested on the saddle horn. He watched the gun belt visible beneath the open edge of the riding coat, dark leather, the holster tied low and angled, the kind of angle that was not accidental and was not fashionable. That angle was functional. That angle was deliberate. That angle belonged to a man who had drawn a pistol quickly and often enough that every detail of the process had been refined down to mathematics. Miles Harlan set down his coffee cup. The rider pulled his horse to a stop in front of the Cottonwood Saloon, 3 buildings down from the sheriff's office. He sat in the saddle a moment longer, then swung down with the careful, stiff movements of a man whose body was protesting every demand being made of it. He looped the reins around the hitching post with hands that were deliberate and sure, despite everything else about him that spoke of exhaustion. Then he straightened, pushed the brim of his hat back with 2 fingers, and turned to look down the street. Miles saw his face. The sheriff was on his feet before he had consciously decided to stand. The man's face was lean, the kind of lean that is not natural, but earned, through months or years of not enough food and not enough rest, and too much time under a sky that gave nothing back. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older, the kind of age that is difficult to pin down on a man who has lived hard. His hair was dark brown, almost black, longer than fashionable, reaching the collar of his coat and pushed back from his forehead by the hat he had just tilted. His eyes, visible now across the distance of 3 building widths, were a pale, clear gray blue, the color of sky just before a storm rolls in from the west. They were not warm eyes. They were not cold either. They were simply precise. The eyes of a man who looked at things and saw them exactly as they were, without the softening that hope or sentiment applies. His jaw was strong, clean-shaved 2 or 3 days ago at a guess, the dark stubble coming in evenly. He was medium height, lean through the body, but the kind of lean that is all wire and consequence, and he stood with a stillness that was itself a kind of language. He looked down the street. He looked at the sheriff's office. He looked at Miles Harlan standing on the porch. For 3 seconds, the two men looked at each other across the dust of Caldwell Creek's main street. Then the stranger turned away, unhitched his saddlebags from the horse, threw them over one shoulder, and pushed through the saloon doors. Miles stood on his porch for a long moment after the doors swung shut. Then he stepped off the porch and walked toward the saloon. If you're just finding this channel, consider subscribing. This story is only getting started, and what Miles Harlan is about to learn has been 4 years in the making. His deputy, a young man named Carter Webb, who was 23 and had been wearing a badge for 14 months, fell into step beside him. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" Carter asked. "Don't know yet," Miles said. "Go round to the back of the cottonwood and stand by the alley door." Carter opened his mouth. "Don't ask," Miles said. "Just go." Carter went. Miles pushed through the saloon doors. The cottonwood was a medium-sized operation. A long bar of dark wood along the left wall, a scatter of tables and chairs, a small stage at the back. Oil lamps hung from the ceiling beams and sat in brackets along the walls, giving the room the warm, slightly hazy quality of a place that existed slightly outside the ordinary world. A dozen people were in the room. Ranchers at 2 center tables, a pair of older men nursing drinks at the bar, the barman himself, and the stranger, who had taken a stool at the far end of the bar nearest the wall, with his back to the corner, so that anyone coming through either door could be seen without turning his head. Miles noticed that choice the way he noticed the angle of the holster. Not accidental, not fashionable. He crossed the room at an easy pace and took a stool 2 down from the stranger. He nodded to the barman, a heavy-set fellow named Abe Tilson. "Coffee," Miles said. He did not look directly at the stranger yet. He let the silence sit. Abe brought the coffee. Miles wrapped both hands around the mug and, in his peripheral vision, watched the stranger drink his whiskey. One deliberate shot. Not the desperate swallow of a man who needs it, but the considered sip of a man taking medicine. The stranger's saddlebags were on the floor between his feet. His coat was still on. His right hand rested on the bar. "Long ride?" Miles said. The stranger did not answer immediately. He turned the glass slowly on the bar with 2 fingers. "Long enough," he said. His voice was quiet, a little rough. The accent was Western, not Texas, not California, somewhere in between. The flat vowels and slight drawl of the high plains. "Where'd you come from?" "East." "And before that?" A pause. "Further east." Miles nodded, as if this was a satisfying answer. He drank his coffee. Around them, the room went on with its low conversation. "We don't get many riders come through Caldwell Creek," Miles said. "Town's not on the main road to anywhere. You have to know to come here, or you have to be lost." "I know where I am," the stranger said. "That's so." Miles set his mug down and turned on his stool, looking at the stranger directly, without apology or performance. "Then maybe you can tell me your name." The stranger looked at him. That same flat, precise gaze. The pause stretched long enough that a man with less patience might have filled it. Miles waited. "Calloway," the stranger said at last. "Will Calloway." Miles held that name a moment. He turned it over. He set it against the angle of the holster and the corner stool. and the careful way this man moved and breathed. He set it against the face, which he had been trying to place since the street, and against something older, a name in a letter, a face in a description that he had read years ago in a different office in a different town. Will Calloway, Miles said slowly. Heard that name before. Heard it in connection with a few things. Something about the territory. Something in a letter from up northeast. He paused. You a man who carries a lot of stories behind him, Mr. Calloway? Calloway picked up his glass, looked into it, set it back down. Sheriff, he said, in a tone that was not a threat and not an apology. I came here to sleep, that's all. I want a room, a meal, and one more drink. I'll be gone by morning. Miles looked at him for a long time. Then he stood. Mabel Fitch runs the boarding house on the east side of town, he said. Clean beds, good breakfast. Tell her Miles sent you. He picked up his mug. Get your rest. We'll talk in the morning. He walked back to the door, nodded to Abe as he passed, and stepped out into the cooling evening. He stood on the wooden sidewalk for a moment, the night coming in purple-gray from the east, the first stars visible above the western mountains. Then he went back to his office, sat down at his desk, and opened the bottom drawer. He went through the old circulars and correspondence slowly, methodically, turning each page and setting it aside. It took him 20 minutes. He found what he was looking for, near the bottom of the stack. Not a wanted poster, but a letter, written in a neat hand on county stationery, from a sheriff in a town called Red Branch, 300 miles to the northeast. It was dated 4 years ago. Miles read it twice, then sat with it in his hands and looked at the window for a while. Then he blew out the lamp and sat in the dark, thinking. The morning came in cold and clear. Miles was at his desk when Carter came in at 7, holding 2 cups of coffee. The man from last night, Carter said. Who is he? His name is Will Calloway. Miles paused. 4 years ago, there was a town called Red Branch. 6 men rode in on a Thursday afternoon and hit the bank. Took close to $12,000 and killed 2 men. A teller named Hobson, 26 years old, just married. And the county judge, a man named Aldous Pierce, who happened to be crossing the street when it started. He set down his coffee. 4 of the 6 were caught, 2 killed in the chase, 2 hanged. A 5th died in Mexico. The 6th was never found. The sheriff of Red Branch wrote every lawman in the territory. Medium height, lean build, dark hair, gray-blue eyes, carries himself quiet. He looked at his deputy. The name in the letter was Calloway. Carter sat down slowly. 4 years is a long time, Sheriff. It is. You think he's the same man? Miles stood and took his hat from the hook. I think when a man with that name and description rides into a town off the main road on purpose and takes a corner stool and angles his holster like a professional and looks like he's been running a very long time. He settled the hat on his head. I think that's worth a conversation. They walked to Mabel Fitch's boarding house in the clear morning light. Mabel was a stout woman in her 60s with white hair pinned up and a manner that suggested she had very little patience for nonsense and had been that way for a long time. She met them at the door. He's in the dining room, she said. Been up since before sunup. Didn't ask for anything but coffee. Will Calloway was sitting at the far end of the long dining table, his back to the wall, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. He watched Miles and Carter come in with the same flat, Careful attention he turned on everything. "Sheriff," he said. "Morning." Miles pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Carter stood near the door. "I want to tell you something, and I want you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that?" Calloway studied him. "Go ahead." "I found a letter last night. It describes a man involved in a robbery in Red Branch 4 years ago. The description matches you in every particular I can check. The name matches." Miles leaned forward slightly. "Now, I'm not a man who convicts somebody on a letter and a resemblance. I've been doing this job for 22 years, and the mistakes that cost me sleep at night were the ones where I moved too fast on not enough." He held Calloway's gaze. "So I'm going to ask you directly. Were you in Red Branch in October 4 years ago?" The room was quiet. A wagon passed outside, the low rumble of it coming faintly through the walls. Somewhere in the back of the house, Mabel moved around the kitchen. The smell of wood smoke and biscuits was in the air. Calloway looked down at his coffee. He sat with the question for a long time. Long enough that Carter shifted his weight by the door. Long enough that a man with less patience than Miles Harlan would have pressed. Then Calloway looked up. "Yes," he said. Carter went very still. "I was in Red Branch," Calloway said, his voice quiet and precise. "I was with those men, but I did not go into the bank. I held the horses on the south side of the building. I did not fire a weapon. I did not know anyone was going to be killed." He paused. "I found out what happened when the other men came back. I left within the hour. I never saw any of them again after that day." Miles looked at him steadily. "That's a fine distinction to draw," he said, holding the horses. "I know it is." Something moved across Calloway's face. Not quite shame, not quite defiance, but the particular expression of a man who has looked at a thing honestly and found it does not improve with looking. "I was riding with those men because I owed one of them a debt, and he called it in. And I was young enough and stupid enough to think I could go along and not be part of what happened." He turned the coffee cup slowly on the table. "I was wrong about that. I've known it for 4 years." "The judge who died," Miles said. "Aldous Pierce." Calloway nodded. "He had a family." "I know, a wife and 2 daughters." Miles sat back. He looked at this lean, tired man across the table and tried to take the full measure of what he was seeing. It was, in his experience, one of the most difficult things a lawman ever had to do. Not the catching of men, not the trial of them, but the looking at them and asking what they were and what they had been, and whether those were the same thing. "Why did you come here?" Miles asked. Calloway was quiet for a moment. "I heard you're a fair man," he said. "I've been hearing your name for about 6 months. Lawman in Caldwell Creek, known for doing things right. Not fast, right." He met Miles's gaze. "I'm tired of running. I've been running for 4 years, and I'm tired. And I don't want to be shot in some ditch by a bounty hunter who doesn't particularly care what the true story is. I thought maybe there was a way to face this like a man." The dining room of Mabel Fitch's boarding house held that statement for a long moment. Miles Harlan looked at Will Calloway and thought about the letter in his desk drawer, and the name Hobson, and the name Pierce, and the 2 daughters who had grown up without a father. He thought about 4 years of riding off the main roads and sleeping with your back to walls and keeping your hand close. He thought about what it cost a man to make that ride and come to the end of it. He did not think it excused anything. He was not built for that kind of thinking, but he thought it was real. "You'll have to stand before a judge," Miles said. "What you were part of, you can't walk away from that. You understand that." "I understand it. And I can't promise you what comes of it. The law takes the shape it takes." "I know." Miles picked up his hat. "Carter, go get Judge Hartwell. Tell him I need him at the office at noon." Carter went. Miles looked at Calloway. "I'll need your weapon, and your word that you won't run." Calloway reached to his hip, drew his pistol with 2 fingers, slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants no one to be nervous, and set it on the table between them. "You have it," he said. The hearing that afternoon in Miles Harlan's office was the kind of proceeding that had the irregular, difficult shape of true things. Will Calloway had been 26 years old when it happened. He had been working cattle near the territorial border when a man named Clay Voss rode in and called in a 3-year-old debt. The debt had been born from a night when Calloway had gotten into trouble and Voss had gotten him out. Voss had never asked for anything in return until that evening, and when he asked, Calloway had not refused. He had not asked what the job was. He had told himself this was because he trusted Voss, which was partly true. It was also because he had suspected it was something that would not bear looking at directly, and he had chosen not to look. He had held the horses on the south side of the bank building. He had heard the shots. He had not known, not truly, until the other men came running out with the money and the news that 2 men were dead. He had left within the hour and had not seen any of them again. Judge Hartwell, a thin, sharp-eyed man of 70 with a reputation for thoroughness, listened to all of it without expression, asked his questions in a flat and methodical voice, and when he was done, sat for a long time without speaking. 2 years of supervised service to the county under Sheriff Harlan's direct authority. At the end of that period, probationary release, contingent on continued good conduct. He looked at Calloway. The law does not exist to punish men indefinitely for who they were at their worst moment. It exists to hold them to account and to ask who they intend to be. This man has held himself to account with greater honesty than this court could have compelled. He paused. "I expect the same standard going forward." "Yes, sir," Calloway said. Miles also wrote at Hartwell's direction to the widow of Judge Pierce. Her reply came 3 weeks later, a short letter from a woman named Cecilia Pierce, who said she had heard of the proceedings and asked to come to Caldwell Creek to speak with the man involved. She arrived by stage on a gray October morning, slight, self-possessed, with dark hair gone gray at the temples, and a face that grief and time had sharpened rather than diminished. They met in the sitting room of the boarding house, Calloway standing near the window, Cecilia crossing the threshold with the composed steadiness she brought to everything. Miles stood in the doorway. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "You held the horses," she said at last. "Yes, ma'am." "You didn't fire the shot that killed my husband." "No, ma'am." "But you were there." "Yes." "My husband was a good man," she said quietly. "Not perfect. He was difficult and proud, but a good man. He was crossing the street to get to the barber shop. He always got his hair cut on Thursday. 20 years of Thursday haircuts." Her voice caught on that detail. Not the courthouse or the decisions, but the Thursday haircuts. And then steadied. "He didn't even see what was happening." Calloway said nothing. There was nothing to say. "My daughters are grown now. The older one is married. The younger is studying to be a teacher in St. Louis. They've made their lives. She looked at him with tired, direct eyes. I came because I wanted to see your face. For 4 years, the face of the sixth man has been a blank in my imagination, and blank spaces fill up with the worst possible things. She paused. You're just a man, a tired, ordinary man who made a terrible choice. Yes, ma'am, Calloway said. I can't forgive you. I'm not here to say that I do. I don't know if I can, and I don't intend to force myself. She held his gaze. But I came because I thought it was right to look at you, and because I wanted you to look at me. In that moment, everything behind Calloway's careful surface was visible. 4 years of back to walls and corner stools, sitting in the open at last. I'll tell them what I've told you, Cecilia said. That you were there, and that you are not the worst thing I imagined. She turned toward the door. What the law does with you, that's for the law. And she went out. Miles watched Calloway standing by the window, unmoving, the expression of a man who has been seen through the weight he carries and has not disappeared beneath it. After a while, Calloway sat down. Miles left him to that. Before this story reaches its end, if you've been following along, consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like this one are told here because the West was full of them, and there are many more to come. The months that followed had the texture of steady work. Calloway rode fence lines with Carter Webb, handled a water dispute between 2 ranching families south of town, and fixed the jail roof that had been leaking since spring. He did his share at the boarding house without being asked, chopping wood, repairing what needed repairing. Mabel Fitch began leaving an extra biscuit on his plate without comment. Miles checked on him every morning and evening, not only with suspicion, but with the attention of a man who has taken a responsibility and intends to keep it. They talked sometimes, the way 2 men talk when circumstances have stripped away the usual social scaffolding. They talked about the territory, the railroad pushing west, the open range being fenced into parcels with names and deeds. They did not talk about Red Branch. They did not need to. Carter Webb watched all of this with the frank curiosity of a young man who has not yet learned to conceal what he finds interesting. One evening, he asked Miles directly, "Do you trust him?" Miles thought about it. "I trust what he does. I trust the way he does it." He paused. "Whether that adds up to trust in the full sense, that takes longer, and it takes the opportunity to be tested." "Has he been tested?" "Not yet," Miles said. "He will be." The test came without announcement, in the form of a man named Ellis Vane, who rode into Caldwell Creek on a January morning that was cold and gray and smelled of coming snow. He was a large man with a flat face and small eyes, and the bearing of someone who had never been required to be subtle about anything. He came to Miles's office first, which at least suggested he knew the forms. "Got word a man named Calloway's in this town," Vane said, dropping into the chair as if it belonged to him. 4-year-old warrant out of Red Branch. There's reward money. I'm here to collect." Miles looked at him steadily. "That warrant has been adjudicated. The man came in voluntarily, was heard before Judge Hartwell, and received a legal ruling. The warrant is no longer outstanding." "I'd like to see that in writing." Miles pulled the file. Vane read slowly, looking for a gap. He found none. "There was private reward money out of Red Branch," Vane said. "Friends of the judge. A county court ruling might not clear that. Mr. Vane, Calloway is under the supervision of this office and meeting every condition of a legal ruling. Any action taken against him while he is under this office's protection will be treated as interference with justice, and I will deal with it as such. Miles paused. Is that clear? Vane held his flat stare a moment. Then he stood and left. Miles told Calloway what had happened. He'll come back, Calloway said. Probably, or send someone. I can leave, be gone by morning. You'd have a clean record. That's not the deal Hartwell set. I know. I'm telling you there's an out. I don't want the out, Miles said. Do you? Calloway thought about it. Then he shook his head. No, he said. Then we'll deal with whatever comes. 2 drifters sent by Vane appeared 3 days later, asking careful questions in the saloon. Miles had them identified within 4 hours. That evening, he sat beside the larger of the 2 at the bar. The man you've been sent for is under the protection of this office and a legal ruling of this court, he said pleasantly. If you proceed, you'll be arrested for interference with justice. I'd suggest you ride back and tell Vane the situation hasn't changed. The 2 men rode out the next morning. Vane himself appeared one last time a week later, sitting his horse at the edge of town in the cold, looking down the main street. Miles sat on his porch and looked back. After an hour, Vane turned and rode away. Carter let out a slow breath. You think he'll come back? No, Miles said. That was for his own benefit. He needed to have looked. Carter was quiet a moment. Sometimes I think this job is mostly about people needing to have looked at things, he said. Miles glanced at him. That's well observed, he said. Spring came to Caldwell Creek the way it comes to desert country. Not gently, but decisively. The scrub came alive. The mornings arrived warmer. The air lost its knife edge. Calloway had been in the town for 7 months, and the town had incorporated him into its landscape with the gradual acceptance that small places apply to things present long enough. He was the man who worked for the sheriff. He was, slowly, not a stranger. One evening in April, with the windows open and the warm air coming in from the south, Miles told Calloway about his own history. The early years in a rough border posting, the decisions made and regretted, the slow accumulation of 22 years that had brought him here. Calloway listened with full attention, and when Miles finished, he said, "You're a good man, Miles." Miles thought about it. "I try to be," he said. "Some days better than others." "That's the only honest answer there is," Calloway said. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere beyond the edge of town. The stars were out in their full number, the way they are in desert country where there is nothing between you and the sky. And the 2 men sat in the lamplight and the quiet of people who have been through something together and come out the other side still standing. The 2 years of Calloway's supervised service ended on an October morning that had in it the same cold clarity as the morning he had arrived. The same blue sky, the same sharp light, the same smell of wood smoke and distance. Miles gave him back his gun and a letter from Judge Hartwell confirming the completion of all terms. He gave him a handshake that lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do. "Where will you go?" Carter asked. Calloway looked down the street, the same street he had ridden in on, the same dust, the same horizon. "South, maybe. Somewhere quiet." "You've earned quiet," Carter said. Something that might, in a different kind of man, have been a smile moved at the corner of Calloway's mouth. "Maybe," he said. He saddled his horse, rested now, in better condition than it had been, and loaded his saddlebags. At the front of the boarding house, Mabel Fitch was on the porch, arms folded, watching without ceremony. Calloway stopped in front of her and took off his hat. "Thank you, Mrs. Fitch," he said, "for everything." Mabel looked at him for a moment. "You left the woodpile better than you found it," she said. "That's enough." He looked at Miles. "I'm glad I came here," he said.
"So am I," Miles said.
Calloway put his foot in the stirrup and swung up into the saddle with the ease of a man who knows no better place. He gathered the reins, settled himself, and looked one last time down the main street of Caldwell Creek. The saloon and the hardware store and the sheriff's office and the boarding house and all the ordinary business of a town going about its morning. "Ride easy," Miles said. "You too," Calloway said. He turned the horse and rode south, through the edge of town, out into the open country, where the land stretched flat and wide, and the sky was very large above it. Miles and Carter watched him go until the dust of his passing settled back into the earth, and the figure of horse and rider was small on the southern plain, and then was nothing. The town of Caldwell Creek went on with its morning. Miles walked back to his office. He sat down at his desk. He poured coffee and looked out the window where the October light was coming in at its long amber angle, and thought about the particular shape of things. The way a tired man on a tired horse had ridden down a street one evening, and something had been set in motion that none of them had predicted, and all of them, in their different ways, had needed. The West was full of such stories. Men riding in off the desert, carrying the weight of what they had been, and the open question of what they might become. Towns that had seen everything and still found something new in the next rider. The endless negotiation between the law and the human being inside the law, between what a man owed and what he was capable of paying back. He had been doing this work for 22 years, and he did not expect it to get simpler. But there were mornings like this one, with the light coming in clean and the air sharp, and the knowledge that something had been handled right, when it felt worth what it cost. Carter came in with coffee and sat down across from him, and they began, without ceremony, the next day's work. Outside, the desert stretched south for 100 miles and more, pale and wide and indifferent, and full of riders who had not yet found their town. The sky was clear above it. The mountains stood to the west. The wind moved through the gap between the saloon and the hardware store and made it sound like breathing. Caldwell Creek waited, as it always had, for whatever came next down the main street.